Here's the clean signal. Here's the high gain signal. Hi there, I'm Chris, and today I want to show you all the details of how I turn my tiny, peeny, weeny Fender Blues Junior amp into a fully fledged high-gain monster using my Pedalboard. We'll go through exactly how I've connected things and also how I mic up the signal to record all those shorts that you... Now first, just a tiny bit of background information here. My main amp, which I've used for I think it's like 15 years now, my Mesa Boogie Mark V combo. I absolutely love it, but it's been having issues and I've had to send it all overseas to get it fixed. So I bought myself another tube amp, and that's the Fender Blues Junior, and I love the amp. I didn't want to buy like a multi-channel super expensive tube amp. I wanted something basic so I could just plug my pedals into it. I wasn't sure how it was going to work because I've never done this, but I'm liking the results, and I'm really just using my pedal board now as a, you know, as a preamp, high gain preamp, and as an FX loop. It does everything, and then I plug into just the input of the Fender Blues Junior, and it seems to work fine. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and I don't think I would have done this if I hadn't had problems with my main amp, because it's just easier to use the gain on the amp and it sounds really good. But you be the judge whether you really need to buy yourself a top dollar amp or whether having a clean tube amp is enough, and just use that as a kind of pedal platform and just maybe use your existing pedals so you don't have to it's going to be less of an investment if you don't buy like I think the Mesa Boogie Mark V has like 9 different voicings on it and 3 different channels. It's a really versatile beast, but you have to pay for it. Okay, so let's go for it. So the most important thing to understand with this pedal board is that it actually functions a bit as a high gain preamp, namely this section. So what's happening here is the signal comes in through the tuner, then goes into the noise suppressor, and then the noise suppressor kind of keeps all these noisy pedals in a loop using the 4-cable method. So if I don't play and the reduction light is shining there, then this entire loop is silenced, which is how you get rid of all hiss and noise. When I do play, the signal goes through these pedals that help me hit the preamp section with a louder and more aggressive signal. And I do that through the tube screamer, which is super important for that tight rhythm sound that we all know and love. And then I have actually 2 compressors here, and both of these help me with the dynamics. Before I finally hit the preamp, this is what I call the preamp, right? And it just functions as a high gain channel. And actually I've modeled this whole thing to work a little bit the same way my Mesa Boogie amp works. So that's why after this pedal I also have an EQ, parametric EQ, which looks a little bit similar to that V-shaped EQ we're so used to seeing on John Petrucci's Mesa Boogie amp. So without the EQ, so you can hear it does a lot to the signal. But let's go through each and every one of these pedals. So here's the tube screamer. The tube screamer, in a way, is a little bit subtle, you could say, though it does help me raise the volumes a little bit, and it also does that famous tightening up of the low-end frequencies and giving you that mid-range hump, which you can kind of control where it happens through the tone knob. So without it, with it, without it, with it. Definitely, I couldn't live without it, and I have some other tube screamers. This is an interesting one, but it doesn't do the same thing at all. This is really the best pedal I've found for just, you know, tightening up the sound. And it does have other applications as well, I think. You can do bluesy stuff with it, but obviously for this kind of sound, it definitely has its very specific purpose. Then we get this compressor, the Wampler compressor, and this one is the hardest one, I think, in this change to describe what it does, because it's really just adding mojo. That's the best way I can describe it. I mean, I have set it to a pretty decent amount of attack, and for those of you who don't know the pedal, the cool thing with this pedal is you can blend in the compression the same way you do when you're mixing in post. So in other words, oftentimes you might not want to compress the whole signal. You just want to add a compression effect, but without messing too much with the original signal. Basically you want to get the benefits of the compressor without ruining the signal. And you can do that in a pedal form through the blend knob. It basically adds parallel compression. And to me, that translates to just like warmth and mojo. But I mean, you want to be careful with warmth in a metal sound, right? Because it can easily get untight and mushy, whatever the word is. But it works here. I think it's a matter of kind of mixing in the right amount of warmth. That's with it, without it. Okay, this one, I don't blame you if you don't hear the difference. There is a difference, but not easy to hear. Now, going to the Dynacomp, which some might know as like a country compressor, I don't have it set to compress at all, so the only real compression happening is through the Wampler and of course through the different distortion pedals. But what this one does, it gives me a very audible kind of push and hump, and I imagine it's a little bit the same maybe as having a rat pedal or something in front of the amp. I don't know, I haven't bought a rat pedal, I've never experimented with one, but you can hear. Now the bad thing with this pedal is it doesn't have an LED indicator, so you never know if you accidentally turn it off. That's why I'm checking all the time by turning down the output volume. But to me, what this red pedal does, it's all about, I don't know if you've ever in post-production messed with an enveloper, I don't know what the word is, but basically where you affect the attack part of the signal and give it an extra peak. I mean, it's similar to just using a compressor, but this is simpler than that. It's just that every note is boosted in the attack phase, so you get that nice crunch. So again, these three pedals, they basically just meddle with your tone before it hits the preamp. And here is really where all the distortion comes from, and we can quite easily try that by turning it off, right? So the Friedman BOD, pretty cool pedal. It's definitely the first pedal I have ever had that does the like high gain preamp in a box, and it does it well. I imagine it's not too far away from, you know, high gain Marshall sounds. I'm not 100% sure, but it's definitely, you know, without it, there's no high gain happening here. So I'm very happy I have it in the signal chain. Now, finally, we get to the EQ, which again, it doesn't really look like like the V-shaped EQ you would see on a Mesa Boogie amp, but that's because this one has more frequencies. So this is the closest I've come to that V-shaped EQ, and you basically have to be a little bit careful with the frequencies like 30 Hertz and 60 Hertz. You don't really have those frequencies on a Mesa Boogie amp, and same thing on the high-end spectrum. But again, you can clearly hear here without the EQ. It just doesn't sound the same. Now, granted, I'm not 100% sure the EQ is that helpful if you're working with a mix now, because what I'm doing is just scooping out the mid-range and boosting the lows and the highs. And I mean, it's a very classic sound, but it's also famous for being hard to mix with. I guess the prime example would be maybe like Dimebag Darrell, where the engineers really had to invent a whole new form of mixing kick drums just to create space for that huge guitar sound. So it's not necessarily something you want to do too much in the mix, but it's definitely an enabler for this kind of super chunky and low gain rhythm stuff. So that's kind of I would say the preamp section. What happens then is I'm sending the signal to basically the effect loops of an amp. Because here's the deal, right? On a clean Fender amp, you don't have an effect loop. You don't really need an effect loop, because an effect loop is pretty much so you can place these time-based effects after the gain stages or after the distortion, because you don't want to be adding distortion on a reverb. That sounds like crap. So the trick here is to first get the distortion going and then send the signal through chorus, delay, and reverb. Now, I'm not using these two here. It's just a little bit of reverb. I don't really like to drown my sound in reverb when I'm doing rhythm stuff. So it's just a tiny little bit. You can barely hear it. It's a little bit drier. So that's the way I want it as well. Again, if I were in a mix, I probably wouldn't use any reverb at all, but I still think it can help you get a little bit more of a room feeling here. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm not using the looper in this case, though it's always useful to have the looper at the end of the effect loop, basically. And here is the Fender Blues Junior amp, which I'm feeding with the whole signal chain I just showed you. And as you can tell, there's just one cable coming in here, the input, and the amp has no reverb dialed in right now, and I don't use a fat switch, and the volume is fairly low, and that's kind of key here. You know, when we're speaking about amps being a good pedal platform and this and that, what that usually translates to is there lots of headroom, right? So is there space for my pedals to you know, have these dynamic peaks, and will the amp catch those, or will it just squash everything? So you need to leave some headroom. I could probably have dialed in less volume here, but the preamp, although clean here, fairly clean, it does affect the tone. So I guess I came up with this setting just because I thought that gave me a good balance. And I do like this amp because as opposed to other tweed Fender amps, I do have treble, bass, and middle. I think that's super useful, you know, when dialing in a good tone using a pedal board like this. But nothing fancy at all happening here. It's just basically a clean channel coming in. And as I said, the noise suppression loop, the effect loop, all of that is happening on the pedal board. It's just and then it's just a simple signal coming into this amp. And finally, the speaker and miking setup here is probably a little more complicated than it needs to be. But I'll go through it quickly here. So what I'm doing here, I'm using just the speaker of my Mesa Boogie Mark V. So you can tell there's no amp here. I've removed that and sent it for repair. So I'm plugging the Fender amp into a power attenuator, which is this. I'll get into why in just a little while. Let's see if you can see. So here's a power attenuator. And from the power attenuator, I'm actually not doing any power attenuation. I'm just feeding the signal through to the Mesa Boogie cabinet here. And this also allows me to kind of tap, well, there's a functionality here for getting a line signal as well. So here it is. This outputs a line signal into this little unit. So what this allows me to do is a whole bunch of things. I can use the Mesa Boogie cabinet with the Fender, which I prefer a little bit for this kind of sound. This is very nice and bright and bluesy sounding, the Tweed cabinet here. It's a Jensen speaker, whereas the Celestion speaker here is darker, and also the whole cabinet is a bit bigger and just gives me more low end. Now, what I like to do for this kind of sound is mix an impulse response, but in this case I'm using this More Radar, which is speaker cabinet simulator. I like to mix that with a real microphone, and you're seeing two of them here, but I'm only using the SM57 in this case. Sometimes I use that AKG mic you see here, but in this case you're just hearing the SM57 and the speaker cabinet, which is a very this is a very roomy kind of sound. Okay, so now you're only hearing the cab simulator. So you should be hearing something that's pretty roomy. So you're only hearing this now, right? Now let's do the opposite. Okay, so here is only the SM57. So this should be much brighter and, well, it's that famous mid-range punch we've heard so many records. So if you put it together, okay, let's listen to both. And then of course, however you choose to balance the cabinet simulator and the microphone is going to have a major impact on tone as well. So everything matters in the end. Now I do think I could probably have gotten a pretty cool sound even with the Fender cab, because I rely so much on this cab simulator. I think it could just have been a cool contrast between the bright Jensen kind of speaker with this super roomy and low-end cabinet simulator. But I had this set up and that's how I dialed in the sound, so that's what I wanted to show you. But usually you can compensate for lots of, you know, if you have a too bright speaker, you can usually compensate for that if you're creative enough. So everything is possible. Now, since I have this speaker just, you know, being around here until I manage to fix the whole amp, I figure I might as well use it, because I've been relying on the Jensen speaker for quite a few weeks now just to get my recordings done. And it's nice, but it's also nice to get some variation. Okay, so I want to thank you so much for sticking around. I hope this has been useful for you. And I also want to encourage you to, you know, if you found any specific in what I've showed you that you'd like me to dive more specifically into, maybe a specific pedal or something, I could do that. I'm really looking for cool topics that you feel might be interesting to you guys. And I don't really know where to start because there's so much to speak about here. But I'm guessing that maybe a few of you are maybe considering buying any of, you know, those pedals. And I could, you know, dive into like a more just deep dive into a single one of those pedals, or something about the recording setup or something. I don't know. You just give me a shout and I'll see what I can do. But I want to thank you for sticking around. You've been fantastic, and I've been Chris Vidal. See ya. Cheers.